And Malaysia unveils its new cabinet. Several ministers have kept their jobs, but there's no deputy prime minister yet.
For a closer look at the new cabinet lineup, we're joined now by Dr. Norshahril Saat. He's a senior fellow at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. Dr. Saat, how significant is the absence of a deputy prime minister in this lineup?
Well, there were lots of rumors circulating before the announcement on who will be deputy prime minister. But if you recall, that the last government, it was the Bersatu Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin and the DPM from UMNO. And the DPM appointment came towards the end of the last Perikatan National Government. So there are many ways to interpret the no deputy prime minister appointment this time. One, it could be that the PM feels that it's unnecessary to have one, as their priority is to stabilize the politics, so it's not about positions. But a contending view is that many leaders are competing for this post, and selecting one may result in unnecessary tensions within the government. Already there are differences, whether this is a Perikatan national government or is this a Barisan national government. And we must remember that the Prime Minister only has 114 MPs and 3 more than the majority requires. So any shifts in the government, any shifts in MPs and alignments will result in the government falling. And hence, I think this is one of the reasons why the Prime Minister has decided to settle for 4 senior ministers rather than naming a Deputy Prime Minister.
So you're not expecting a Deputy Prime Minister to be named then?
Well, if you follow the trend, based on what Muhyiddin Yassin did when he first became Prime Minister, I think what Ismail Sabri is doing is just to follow the same trend.
Okay, so which appointments then stood out for you among those that were sort of given a portfolio this time around?
Well, there were no significant changes except for a few names being dropped, a few names introduced, and several swapping of ministries. Some parties gets less position. UMNO naturally gets more this time. But I think in a pandemic situation right now, I think a lot of attention will be on the finance ministry, the trade and industry, as well as health. I think the most significant appointment is Hairi Jamaluddin, helming the health ministry, as previously he was seen as the person in charge of the vaccination program. With a change of personnel in the health ministry, I think the Prime Minister is signaling that he wants to see changes on this front. But he also wants continuity and stability. And I think we can see this in the reappointment of some of the ministers. And one example is the Finance Minister, Tengku Zafrul Abdul Aziz. And I think this is an important appointment as Finance Minister because his role is to ensure stability for the capital markets.
And Dr. Saat, do you think that it's going to be effective, this cabinet, or is the move going to backfire in retaining sort of many familiar faces, so much so that DAP Sec-Gen Lim Guan Eng said this looks like a recycled cabinet?
Well, if you look at the netizens' comments, I think generally many are quick to judge the current government as preserving the status quo. And as you rightly point out, I think the word recycling keeps on coming up. But I think even though the makeup of the cabinet remains the same and most of the ministers are the same people running the country, but there are significant changes this time. For instance, Ismail Sabri has reached out to the opposition. And there were photos circulated of his meeting with opposition leaders, Pakatan Harapan leaders in particular. And this means that there's more stability this time. So if, let's say, in an event where MPs in his coalition decides to pull out again, this does not mean that automatically the current government will fall, provided there's support from the opposition. And if you look at the statements given by the former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, he's not totally against Ismail Sabri, and he has repeatedly said that he is willing to work with this new Prime Minister. But of course, one must remember that Ismail Sabri still needs to test his majority through a vote of confidence, and I think he's trading very carefully this time round.
Well, the Prime Minister has said that each ministry needs to prove itself or in its initial achievements within the first 100 days. Is this a bid to build public confidence in the government?
Yeah, I think in one way we can say that he's trying to bid for public confidence, and he has given this 100 days for all ministers to demonstrate their qualities. I think this is also a stern warning that it's not business as usual for the ministers. And I think the Prime Minister is already anticipating criticisms on why have there not been any significant changes in the cabinet positions. But I think the signal he's trying to give is that while the personalities may be the same, he's asking Malaysians to basically judge his cabinet based on the outcome, the delivery, and the effectiveness. And hence, he's making a pledge here and commitment, calling for Malaysians to trust him that they will see changes within 100 days. And I think it's also a signal that there's a sense of urgency on the part of the Prime Minister.
And of course, the backdrop of all of this is coping with COVID-19, and a lot of tension is going to be on the health minister on that spot as Malaysia continues to battle this COVID outbreak. What do you see as perhaps the immediate priorities that Khairi Jamaluddin is going to have?
I think the biggest priority for the health minister, Khairi Jamaluddin, is to expedite the vaccination program. But this alone will not be sufficient. He must also work towards changing the attitudes of anti-vaccination group. But I think to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it requires a more holistic approach, not only on the health front. There are also economic and social implications that the government has to address. And to ensure that Malaysians adopt the SOPs and also effective enforcement mechanisms must be put in place. So I think it's not only Khairi Jamaluddin's responsibility. I think the whole cabinet would have to come and act together to tackle this COVID-19 situation.
Thank you for talking to us this evening, Dr. Saat, Dr. Norshahril Saat, Senior Fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute.